This is Good Shepherd Sunday. It's a week where we hear phrases, where there are images that abound that are familiar and comforting. Psalm 23, right? Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Surely I will dwell in the house of God forever. The trouble with Good Shepherd Sunday is that these images, these comfortable words are really familiar. And so there's a way in which they can sometimes escape us. If you're anything like me, there's a moment when those words wash over you, when those images dance in your mind, and it's lovely, and it's comforting. And on my better days, I might spend more than just a moment wondering a little bit about God's love. But then something interrupts that. Something in life pushes me in a different direction. And just as quickly as those thoughts entered my head, they're gone again. I don't know if you've ever experienced that. But there's something about, it's strange, right? We can know something really well and still, for all intents and purposes, be practically ignorant of it. And I think the images and the comfortable things that we grapple with on Good Shepherd Sunday are those kinds of things. So I wonder if there might be a way of exploring these things that might do a better job of getting under our skin and cut through some of the things that have become so familiar to us in church and just in our culture. There's a story in the book of Genesis about a man named Abraham who was called by God to leave everything he knew, his house, his family, his religion, indeed his worldview, and to go to a new place. And a little ways down the line, Abraham is asked by God to take his son Isaac and to offer him as sacrifice. Is this a story you know? Everyone's favorite, right? No, bear with me though, because there's really good stuff here that's just waiting beneath the surface. The thing about the story that you need to understand is that Abraham doesn't know what it means to follow God. Abraham's inherited a worldview that teaches certain things, a Mesopotamian understanding of the universe where there are many gods who need human beings to give them things, to sacrifice things for them, to prop them up. Gods that are fickle and distant, and you never know where you stand. And Abraham is on a journey to learn more about God. The other thing you need to know is that the book of Genesis is a kind of prologue, an answer to the question, what happened before Exodus? Because Exodus is the seminal event for the Hebrew people when they're freed from bondage and slavery. So this book of Genesis isn't meant to be a kind of journalistic capture of historical events. If you get stuck in questions about what happened when, or if they really said those things in those words, you've missed the point. Genesis is trying to say things that are deeply and importantly true, but not necessarily in a way that we would expect from a history text or a newspaper. So Abraham gets this message from God, this call to go and sacrifice Isaac. And Abraham lies to Isaac, lies to his wife, lies to his servants, and heads off to the mountainside. And they build the altar. And there's this heartbreaking moment where Abraham binds Isaac and lays him on the altar and is about to do the deed. But then God intervenes and says, stop, no, don't do it. And Abraham doesn't, and a ram is provided instead. Now maybe you've heard this story told before, and the point has been, look at Abraham's faith. Look how he withheld nothing from God. Isn't that amazing? You should be like Abraham. Have you heard that before? Nonsense. The honest response to that story is, what kind of God would demand that you sacrifice your child? And to the original Mesopotamian audience, to those in the ancient world retelling this story, the answer to that question is all the rest of them. Because when God says to Abraham, you should go and sacrifice Isaac, Abraham doesn't say how or why, or what on earth do you mean? Abraham says, okay. Because Abraham has seen this done before. Because this is a thing that was practiced in an ancient context where you never knew where you stood with distant and angry gods. And so the people who are telling this story, who are experiencing this for the first time, they're nodding along as the story unfolds. It's familiar territory. It's as if someone said, once upon a time there was a princess locked in a tower, and you know where the story is going, right? So it is for the generations of people that pass this story down. They know what it was like for gods to demand something. The part that is revolutionary and disruptive is where God intervenes and says no. Abraham is learning what God is like. We, with Abraham, are learning what God is like. And the disruptive element in this story is where God intervenes and says, no, that is not how this works. God provides, which, by the way, is what Abraham named the place. God provides. In a culture that said you had to give everything to distant, angry gods and never really know where you stand. In a culture that said much was demanded of you. This God, the one God, says, that's not how it works. I don't need things from you. I have gifts to offer instead. So the thing is, when Jesus says that he is the Good Shepherd, when we explore these images on Good Shepherd Sunday, this is what we're on about. The thieves and bandits that Jesus speaks of, they're the voices that are so prominent in our culture and sometimes in our churches that say, if only you gave more, if only you believed the right things, if only you were more put together, if only you bought this thing, you could be made whole. In a world that understands everything to be transactional, in a world that wants us to believe that we need to do things to earn our way into God's love, the idea of God as the shepherd, Jesus as our good shepherd, upends all of that and says, no, God will provide. Nothing more is required of you than to simply be, than to simply accept a relationship with God, to understand that God is there and loving and caring for us in spite of ourselves, all the time, with no strings attached. The thieves and the bandits want to say, but have you earned it? Have you been good enough? And that voice in our head sometimes says, these things that are happening to me, I must have done something wrong. Or the things I want to happen, maybe if I'm just better, if I just do more, if I just fix things about myself, buy that self-help book, lose those last 10 pounds. But the Good Shepherd says, you're already enough. You are loved. And I'll even leave the flock to chase you down, because there's nowhere you can go to escape my love. Now, there are plenty of things we can talk about that are important, about how we're called to live as God's people, the ways that we're called to justice and kindness and mercy and goodness in the world. That's all important, but it's all secondary. The primary thing is that God, our Good Shepherd, claims us, knows us, names us, and calls us to be just as we are. And so this Good Shepherd Sunday, I encourage you to pause, to let the comfortable words and images linger a bit longer, to let yourself be disrupted to the scandal that the way we think the world isn't true. It's not all a transaction. We dwell in God's love in a way that we can't escape, and that is marvelous news. Though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we can fear no evil, for God is with us. We know that we will dwell in the house of God forever. Amen.